Morning.
Good morning, morning.
Morning.
There, another lovely day here. So it's nice and sunny. It's just wicked cold.
At least the wind
Goodness.
has died down.
Yeah. All right. All right, so we can go ahead and get started. I have people coming in, so if I look away, it's because I'm admitting them. Good morning, everybody. Thank you for joining us for yet another amazing presentation this morning for the MCDA Speaker Series. Just as a reminder, this came out of our MMA workshops. There was so much information. We wanted to make sure that we were continuing to share that with the community. I'm going to throw it over to Jen for her morning spiel there. Good morning, Jen.
Good morning. Hello, everyone. I'm Jen Peters, Director of Community Development for Sunrise County Academic Council and Maine Community Development Association President, at least for the time being. So next year it'll be somebody else. But anyways, I'd like to welcome you all here. And just to give you a little bit of background, the Maine Community Development Association's purpose is to provide forums to increase awareness and foster communication relating to community development issues and concerns, and to provide education and training through workshops. So that's what we're doing here. I hope you all have been able to participate in some of the past programs that have taken place. If not, they're all recorded and online at maincda.org. And if you're not a member of the Community Development Association, you should join. So give me a call and I'll talk to you about it. Thank you. Kristen, back to you.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Jen, for that information. So I guess without further ado, I'm gonna send it over to excuse me. Hi, we're gonna start over. Without further ado, we're gonna send it over to Gary to introduce himself and let us know why he's here with us this morning.
Awesome. Good morning, everyone. My name is Gary Fearon. I work out at the HUD field office here in Bangor, Maine, right at the Federal Building. This morning, I'm just going to be doing a presentation on an overview of all of HUD programs. A lot of folks that I've talked to since being in this position here are not aware of kind of the breadth of the scale of HUD programs and what we offer. A lot of people just think of vouchers and, fair housing and equal opportunity, maybe CDBG grants, and that's really about it. So there's a lot more that HUD offers, and I just want to touch upon some of those programs. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen real quick. And hopefully everyone can see this. All right. So before I begin, I'm sure many of you are aware that a lot of the federal agencies are undergoing a lot of restructuring right now, cuts to some of the programs and funding opportunities. So the presentation I'm giving today may not necessarily be exact what it's going to be in the future for programming and funding opportunities. So I just want to put that caveat out there. Before I begin, because some of these programs obviously have been out for a while, some of them are a little bit newer, and we're not sure the direction of where some of these programs are going to go.
Gary, real quick,
Yeah.
I just want to remind everybody to please mute your microphones during the presentation. Gary, would you prefer to field questions during the presentation or following it?
During the presentation is fine. So.
Okay. All right.
All right. So just a little bit about HUD in our field office here. So our field office is located in Bangor, Maine. We are the only office here in the state. There's 3 of us total that work in this office. We have a state director, myself as a program analyst, and then Ann Martin, who's a management analyst. And we fall under Region 1, which is the New England region. And there's about 190 employees across the region right now.
Gary, just a quick interruption. Did you want to be in slideshow mode?
Am I not in slideshow mode?
No, we can see all of the little tiles running down the left of the screen.
I wonder if it's still sharing my main screen here. Let's see. How about now?
That's better. Thank you.
No problem. I should have started the presentation and then shared screen because when I clicked on start presentation, it jumped to my other screen. So sorry about that. But our field office here in Maine, again, there's 3 of us that work here. We fall under one of HUD's major departments called Field Policy and Management. And we're kind of like the gateway to HUD. So we're kind of the liaison between community partners, folks that, reside in public housing or multifamily housing, and then bigger HUD, which is our regional office in Boston. So we're kind of the one-stop shop, and we field and triage to the right areas. We don't necessarily focus on any particular area. So, if somebody
Not
was to call
anymore.
this, what's that? Yeah, who knows? Things may change. So, and but we don't necessarily, as of right now, we don't have specific oversight of a particular program. So at the Boston office, each of the major department areas have folks that work, in public and Indian housing, multifamily housing, fair housing, equal opportunity. So there's designated staff that work in those departments. And us here, we're kind of just the general overview overseers of all the programs. So that's kind of a little snapshot of what we do here, kind of the easiest way to explain it. So these are the major department areas. I won't bore you reading down through them all. So this HUD's mission statement here. These were the strategic priorities from the previous administration. We still haven't received any of the new priorities for the new administration, so we just left the old ones up for the time being. So this is probably the area that most folks are typically interested in, especially if you're, a city or a town or a nonprofit. This is the Office of Community Planning and Development is really our funding opportunities. So all of our major grant areas fall under this department here. And they, and they provide resources to obviously build new housing, boost housing supply, home ownership, creating jobs, workforce housing, updating existing infrastructure or community areas that serve those towns. So it's kind of the best way to explain it is basically it's a department that manages all the funding for those towns, cities, and nonprofits. And these are some of our major funding opportunities that are current as of right now. I would say most people are typically familiar with the CDBG grants that is administered through the state of Maine, the continuum of care. We did have a couple of new grants that have come out over the past few years, such as the Pro Housing Grant and the Price Grant. And then we do have disaster relief money too as well. Another one that I forgot to mention that's also a very big one is the community project funding, or most people know as congressional funding projects. So kind of I call it the earmarking funding opportunities there that you apply for through the local senator offices. So those are our major grant and program areas that we typically see here in the state of Maine. So this is just a little bit more about some of the grants here. Of course, with any grants, some are competitive, some are not necessarily competitive. As long as you kind of meet certain criteria, you're eligible for those grants. And I just want to put out there too that our grants that typically would be rolling out right now for the year are still kind of on pause. And I know a lot of folks have had issues with funding being released for grants, or grants that were awarded, they still haven't received the funding for it. Obviously, I'm sure many of you were just to be patient with that. But if you do have any questions in the meantime, if you were awarded a grant or you're having issues, please reach out to our office. We can kind of give you a little bit of a better answer, because each grant right now is kind of being reviewed. Some are a little bit further in the process of the reviewing. Some are a little bit behind in the review process. So if you do have any questions about a grant that you've been awarded or soon to be awarded, just reach out to us. We could try to get you a better answer of when to expect to see that funding. So community development block grants, again, that is probably our most popular grant here in the state of Maine, but it's a pretty broad grant. It doesn't have to necessarily just be housing. It could be, touching upon public facilities, economic development, planning, administration, creating jobs, infrastructure, or other. We kind of leave it a little bit of a loose end on there. We try to leave room for creativity because obviously each town, city, organization has its own priorities or what they're kind of focusing on. So we do ask folks, if they have a creative idea or a solution that they want to use the money for, they can reach out to us directly or Deb Johnson to get further clarification. But we do kind of like those creative grant funding opportunities. It mixes it up and really kind of showcases some of the innovations that folks are doing. So this is kind of just a breakdown of how the community planning department kind of distributes funds. So a lot of times folks think that, money just goes straight from HUD, straight to the organization. Sometimes it does, but most of the time it kind of flows through multiple agencies on the way down. So for CPD funds, they're awarded to the state and then they're broken down through the Department of Economic and Community Development or Maine State Housing. So those are really the two big entities that distributes the funding, and then it goes down to the particular funding source. So just a quick little snapshot of how the money's kind of distributed here. Last year, I believe is almost $12 million that were awarded in CDBG funds. So this is just a little bit of a snapshot here of some of the towns that have received money for the different grant opportunities that we have here. You're probably you're probably thinking in your head, well, I know a lot more towns that got money. The reason for it is the reporting system that we do doesn't necessarily have a great way to break down the funding when it's awarded through the state of Maine out into the smaller communities. We don't have a great tracking system or reporting system that breaks it out nicely. So you'll see that the state of Maine was awarded, as an example, $12 million, but of course that gets sent out into the communities and folks that were awarded the CDBG funds. But just kind of a little bit of a quick breakdown here. And if you do have any questions on the CDBG, Deb Johnson that works down in Augusta, she is a great point of contact. I'm sure some of you folks have worked with her previously, but she really knows the ins and outs of the program. And if she's unsure, typically she'll reach out to our office too, just to run it by and make sure it's okay. So you can reach out to her or us directly. And I can send out this presentation after the PowerPoint after the presentation here. I do have some hyperlinks in here that talk more about some of the specific HUD programs and funding opportunities. So when I send this out, you'll have those hyperlinks there if you want to explore a little bit more. So the Office of Housing, this is really our Federal Housing Administration. This is where the department that basically issues mortgage insurance and programs to folks that are first-time home buyers, or if they're of a certain income range, they can qualify for some of these FHA loans to buy property, get into home ownership. And that's really one of our bigger popular programs here in the state of Maine. We do have a lot of folks that reach out to our office wondering about what kind of programs we offer. If they're looking at buying a home. Maine State Housing also has some additional kind of kickers that can be used to support folks that are buying their first time home or other properties. And under this department is housing counseling. So if you do plan on using any of the FHA programs, folks do have to go through housing counseling. There's currently 6 agencies in the state of Maine that provide that counseling. I do know there's a couple of organizations in the state that are looking at providing counseling too as well. So we may be adding a couple more onto this list. But currently, those are the 6 agencies here in the state of Maine that can provide that counseling. The Office of Public and Indian Housing, this is really more geared towards your public housing authorities. So I won't go spending too much time diving into this because I don't believe anyone here on the call works for a housing authority, but it's just a great way to kind of understand what they do and how that funding and programming flows out. So The PIH, or Public Indian Housing, they oversee and monitor the Housing Choice Voucher, or Section 8, and public housing programs. They also have some supplemental programs that kind of help with self-sufficiency. They kind of basically provide case management and services to folks that live in public housing. And then just a little caveat there, there's about a little over 12,000 units currently leased here in the state of Maine. And you can see kind of broken down here how much money is obligated through the state of Maine in FY23 and FY24 to support public and Indian housing here. So some of the housing authorities do receive more funding because they are getting funding sources from other agencies too as well. But this funding is just a snapshot of HUD funding that is awarded to the housing authorities. And this was what I was just talking about here. This is kind of just a breakdown of the funding for each of the housing authorities. I believe there are a couple other towns that are looking at establishing housing authorities too as well. So they may be added on here shortly. And if you ever had any questions, you can obviously call this 1-800 number. I would probably not recommend it. You're going to have to go through press 4 for this, and then press 1 for this, and press 2 for that. It's much easier if you just reach out to us, and then we can connect you directly with the folks. So I always just tell people to call us instead. Our Office of Multifamily Housing. This is kind of tied in. A lot of people kind of confuse public and Indian housing with multifamily housing. The biggest difference is public and Indian housing. I kind of tell people think more of vouchers, folks that are, living within the community that are on vouchers, that are going directly to the landlords. Multifamily housing is what's called a project-based rental assistance program. So you have entire properties that are subsidized. So folks that are residing in there don't necessarily receive a voucher, but the actual facility or structure itself is subsidized by HUD. And then the folks that live in there have to meet certain income criteria and pay a percentage of what they do make to reside there and pay for their rent. So this is just a quick snapshot of multifamily housing. So in the state of Maine, we have 302 properties with about 8,300 occupied units or households. So multifamily housing, public Indian housing are kind of our two biggest programs here in the state of Maine that obviously support folks that are low income and need housing. I want to put out there too that the USDA Rural Development also has a bunch of multifamily property scattered around the state too as well. We typically get a lot of calls, somebody will state that they live in, subsidized housing, and then we find out that it's a USDA property. So we do have a close relationship with USDA. So we always will look up the property and make sure that we have oversight of it. If we don't, we just connect them over to USDA. So, but I just want to put out there, USDA does have quite a footprint here in the state of Maine for multifamily housing as well. A couple of just different programs. I won't hammer this too hard, but the two biggest programs or sections, we call them just 202 or 811. 202 is providing rental assistance for elderly. So a lot of the assisted living facilities, elderly homes, there's quite a few here in the state of Maine that fall under section 202. And then section 811 provides affordable housing to very low and extremely low income folks that are living with long-term disabilities. So our Office of Fair Housing and Equal Opportunity, this is a HUD department that basically takes any sort of complaints that they receive and they investigate them. So we typically do get quite a few calls here that, their landlord's not fixing their property, or they believe that the housing authority is, retaliating against them or discriminating against them for whatever reason. So folks can call our office here and make a formal complaint. Folks can also make a formal complaint right online too as well. And once HUD receives that, they basically look at the information that is given or provided to them to see if it meets the actual criteria of an investigation. And if it does, HUD can investigate it directly, or in most cases, they contract out to the Maine Human Rights Commission here in the state of Maine. that will also look into that, investigate it too as well. So folks can reach out to the Maine Human Rights Commission directly and file a complaint. And then that will get escalated up to HUD just for tracking purposes. But in the state of Maine, the Maine Human Rights Commission is primarily the organization that will do the investigating. The only instance where they would not do the investigation is if it's a violation of federal laws. So if it's a violation of a federal law and not necessarily a state law, HUD will do the investigation in that case. And then we also, many folks are aware of Pine Tree Legal Assistance. So that's a program that is paid for by HUD that provides legal services to folks that are of low income. And just for a number, and honestly, I thought it was quite high, was back in FY24, we had 280 cases that were processed between HUD and the Maine Human Rights Commission. I do think there's probably a lot more that does happen here in the state of Maine. And unfortunately, just people don't make those complaints or they're unaware of the actual complaint process. I would say that number is probably higher, but of the actual formal reports, we had 280 cases. That's just the number there to contact them, or you can make a report online. Most folks just call our office directly. So HUD does provide a few different technical assistance programs. The newest one that just kind of rolled out recently is the Distressed Cities Technical Assistance Program. And I'm going to talk about here in a minute a little bit more in depth. Thriving Communities Technical Assistance Program and Community Compass. Those are our three biggest TA programs. I will put a little caveat out there that HUD does provide a lot more technical assistance, but those have to be requested by a housing authority. So if your town has a housing authority and you're looking at receiving technical assistance on a very specific area, the housing authority can actually make that TA request on behalf of the actual town. So just want to put that out there. The DCTA program, which is our newest program, we've been trying to get out and talk to folks about this program, really make them aware of it, because it's a technical assistance program that doesn't necessarily just look at housing, affordable housing, home ownership. It really looks at the actual town, city as a complete entity. So to qualify for it, you just have to meet one of the three highlighted criteria. These are a list of the towns that are currently eligible and or counties that are eligible. We're actually working with DCTA to try to get some more towns added on here. I just don't know. We kind of have a speculation that some of the data that they were using to meet one of those three criteria wasn't up to date, or maybe wasn't 100% accurate. So we've had a few towns that have actually reached out to us and they're like, hey, like our town should be on that list because we have a higher unemployment rate of 9% or a greater population decline. So if that is the case for your town and you're not necessarily listed here on this list, we can work with you to get you added on and then make you eligible for that technical assistance. We are working with a couple of towns right now on this. And the nice thing about this program that I honestly love is you basically tell HUD what your needs are. Like, I need help. I'm a new city manager. I just started a year ago. We have really horrible budgeting. I'm struggling with recruiting and retention of city staff, or, a lot of our zoning ordinance laws are out of date. They're 20 plus years old. Is there somebody that can help me with that? The nice thing about this program is you bring the need to HUD, and then HUD provides that technical assistance for the town. And there's different levels of involvement. There's three different levels. So one is a little bit more of like a peer-based group where they'll pair you with a similar town or a city to kind of learn best practices and share ideas. Another level is kind of the middle of the road where they'll provide technical assistance, but it's a little bit more of a, just kind of want to say like a broad scope. So like if you're struggling with recruiting retention, maybe it's just something where they look at your existing policies, make some recommendations, and then that's about it. The third level involvement, which is the most involved, the TA folks will actually come out and work with you in person. It's a high level of expectation of collaboration. So they expect to get at least like an hour a week out of you, which doesn't seem necessarily like a lot, but when you're running a town and you got 500 other things going on and you're putting out fires constantly, 1 hour can be a lot for some folks, but it is our most involved and it has a minimum of 1 hour per week. And that technical assistance can go upwards of 2 years on top of it too as well. These are just a couple of moving on to another department, the office of secretary and deputy secretary, just some of the acts that have come out recently over the past few years that kind of fall under this. I'm not sure necessarily why they fall under this. You know, VAWA, for example, the Violence Against Women Act. A lot of times that I equate that more with housing. Not sure why it falls under this office, but it does. So we just kind of go with it. And the self-help housing property disposition program. This is where HUD properties go for sale here in the state of Maine. So I believe right now we have a little over 30 properties here in the state of Maine that are going through acquisition. Eventually will be going, you know, out to the market. Folks can bid on these homes here. The nice thing about this program that I do like, it is a little bit of a lengthy program when HUD has to basically recoup or take ownership of a home. It is a little bit of a process to, from the acquisition to get it on the market. It can take quite a while. But a lot of these homes typically go for less than what they're actually valued at. The reason why I say that is I don't think, honestly, there's a lot of folks that are aware of these kind of federal properties that go for sale. So typically, from what I've seen, I think there's kind of just a group of people that check these lists constantly and they're scrubbing them and looking at purchasing them. But we do have quite a few properties here that are up for sale. The USDA actually has quite a few properties that they've acquired or have recouped and go on the market too as well. And they actually have a list of properties that they can provide. So if you're ever working with folks or you know folks that are trying to find a home, we always recommend that, you know, they check out this list of homes that are available in the state of Maine because they may be able to, you know, snag it at a discount price. Our next area is the lead hazard control in healthy homes. So as many of you folks are probably aware, there's kind of been a huge effort of making, you know, getting lead out of homes, making them safe homes. You know, there's a lot of legality around it. You know, you have to disclose if there's lead in a home that still has it. A lot of cities have actually been doing a very good job at remediating a lot of their homes. You know, making them safe to live in again. And we just kind of wanted to put a snapshot of some of the recent grant awardees for the lead hazard reduction grant. HUD right now, we do play a role with FEMA. Most people are like, HUD plays a role with FEMA. If there is at any point a declared disaster here in the state of Maine, HUD can be activated essentially to work with FEMA on those supporting the cleanup and restoration of communities. And that's actually being involved in going out and helping in that process. We also would assist those towns, cities that are impacted and getting disaster relief funds out there too as well. So we kind of wear a couple of different hats when it comes under FEMA. I know, for example, some of my counterparts that work in other field offices have volunteered, like when they had the big hurricane that had impacted North Carolina, Tennessee area. We had some folks go down there for a few months and actually provide relief and assist. And then same with the California fires that were happening. We had quite a few HUD folks that had volunteered to go out and support that too as well. These were just some of the FEMA declared recent disasters here in the state of Maine. We did not necessarily play any direct role in any of these as a HUD. We did have some folks that had reached out for disaster recovery funds, and we were able to assist them in applying for those. And I will open it up to any questions. Again, I just, you know, a lot of our programs are kind of in the shuffle right now. So I'm sure some of this will change here over the next few months. I do plan on updating this presentation to make it more up to date and accurate. I don't want to provide training or an opportunity and talk about things, and somebody gets real excited and then they reach back out to me in a few months and like, hey, I want to apply for this. And it may not necessarily be there, or it could still be there, but the requirements of that grant have changed. So I just want to put that little caveat out there again. So
Gary, if I
right.
could jump in
Yeah,
just for a minute.
yeah, go right ahead.
When you were talking about when you're talking about the CDBG program, Community Development Block Grant Program, the
Hmm.
Maine Community Development Association acts as basically an advisory group for that program.
Yep.
So we're very well connected with what's going on, you know, how changes that are made, things that come up every year.
Yep.
But the other thing is there also is a network of technical assistance providers across the state of Maine. So, and Sunrise County Economic Council is one of those, Northern Maine Development Commission. So the regional planning organizations, basically, plus Sunrise County Economic Council, are receive some funding to be able to assist folks with with learning about the CDBG program and applying for funds. You're absolutely correct. Deb is the person to go to when you have any questions, really, but the TA folks on the local level
Yep.
can dive right in and help you figure things out. So
100%.
yeah. Anyway, so I just wanted to toss that out there.
And if you do have
Actually,
a
Deb is
list
on the
of,
call.
and I was
I
going to
was going to
say,
say,
Jed,
Deb,
if you, oh, go ahead, Jen.
I was just going to say, Deb is on the call, so she wanted to say hello. I'm sure everybody would like to. Oh, no, maybe she's had to step away. She's still muted.
I'm
Oh, there
good.
she goes.
Hello. Hello, everybody.
Morning, Deb. So you were saying, Gary?
I was going to say too, if you had a list of all the TA provide, I don't know if you know all the TA providers in the state, but if you have those, I would love to have them in there just for folks to be aware of those organizations that could provide that TA.
I will send it out to you so that you have it, but I'll also give it to whoever's putting the things up on the website for this session as well.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks.
So Gary, out of curiosity, out of all of your programs, is there one in particular or one or two in particular that you find to be most beneficial in creating a positive effect on our current housing crisis? Is there something that you like that looks good for it?
As far as funding opportunities, I would say the congressional discretionary spending is probably one of the bigger ones. Maine is kind of very fortunate that we've had Senator Susan Collins sit as the chair of the Appropriations Committee. So I think Maine in some ways is kind of elevated in some ways when it comes to being awarded a lot of those funding opportunities. The thing I do say I like about it, it's very flexible. So if you have an idea, there's I want to kind of say less constraints. So it's a little bit more broad in scope. So if you do plan on doing a bigger housing project, or throwing in some creative ideas in there, I think that's a great one. The home grants that we have is also really big. Two of our newer grants, the pro housing grant, I would say is probably our best one for that. Because that it looks at not only building housing, it can do renovation. It can provide funding for technical assistance. Like say if you're like, hey, I'm not ready to build, but I'd like to have a study done to kind of see what I can do. You can apply for that kind of funding too as well. So I do like the pro housing grant. I was able this past fall to actually sit on the grant review board for all the applications across the country for the pro housing grant, and it was really eye-opening, I think, to kind of see what towns and cities and counties are doing across the country for housing. Honestly, I'd never realized how quite extensive and creative some of these folks get when they're applying for these grants. So the pro housing grant's another great one. I think too, if you do have the advantage of having a housing authority, it does unlock some funding opportunities and ability, I think, to build some more affordable housing if you have an actual housing authority. A lot of the tax credit programs that are out there are still available. I don't know what's going to be in the works when it comes to tax credits, here in the future. I was listening to a presentation by Novacratic last week, and they think that the tax credits are going to be expanded and a little bit more easier. I think there's going to be more funding, or at least that's what they had alluded to, that there's going to be more funding in tax credits and really expanding that program a little bit more. And I always tell folks too, when you're looking at doing affordable housing, is obviously look at other, agencies, other areas for grants, and being able to kind of tie them or piece them in together too as well. I think some folks, and I used to be a housing director, when I first started, I kind of had that narrow scope where I would just look at HUD funding opportunities or USDA. It wasn't until a couple of years I started to get creative and, trying to piece, different grants together to accomplish a certain project. So I just like to put that out there. I just kind of noticed that with myself. I kind of felt like a little bit of a rookie when I had first started out, but just looking at all the funding opportunities that are out there and just trying to piece the puzzle together. So, but I would say those are probably the biggest areas.
Good deal. We do have a question from the chat. Is there anything specific that focuses on creating workforce or missing middle housing?
Yep. So they have two different programs. Let me see if I can.
And that's Jen from Waldoboro, by the way.
So I will say for middle housing, I think that's something that there's a lot more emphasis on, I think, or a lot more spotlight on that area right now. I know the Federal Home Loan Banks of Boston and New York, especially for this area, some of their funding opportunities have become a lot more creative and expanding the income threshold for housing. I want to say a lot of times folks kind of look at that, 80% AMI or below, looking at folks that are extremely low income. But a lot of people have realized, especially since COVID, that the middle class and folks that, are working, they're above that 80% AMI, are still really struggling to afford housing or get into housing. So there's a lot more of a shift and a focus, I think, for those folks too as well. And upping the threshold. I know some of the COVID funding that had come down, especially like the homeowner assistance fund through Treasury, they had a much higher threshold of 150%. There was another program that went up to 175, and I'm forgetting which one that is. But the nice thing about those programs is it touched a lot of folks, and we're able to help folks to find housing, get into housing, and secure it. And what was the other one? It was tied into workforce housing. Was that the second part of the question?
Yeah, workforce or missing middle housing.
So for workforce housing, that's obviously another big critical need. CPD, I'm going to pull up the slide here. I'll share it back again for you folks. All right, so hopefully you can see that on there. So the home program that I'd kind of alluded to, that one has a big component of workforce housing in there. We have another program that is not on here, but is called the Moving to Work program. And that is available to folks that have a housing authority or working with a housing authority. But that program, a lot of folks have used this program, Moving to Work, because it's a grant that basically allows you propose an idea to HUD. You're like, hey, I have this really, great idea that I think will, get folks into housing or kind of meet the needs of our community. So it's kind of like a test pilot grant program. But we've had quite a few folks around the country use that to develop workforce housing and tying in actual career training into it too as well. So the Moving to Work program, I don't have it listed here, but I can send a link to that with the actual PowerPoint itself. But a lot of folks have used that program to build workforce housing. With the tax credits, I know a lot of folks use the tax credits programs to do workforce housing too as well. I think we're going to see a move in that direction with the new administration for that workforce housing. So I'm kind of curious to see what's going to roll out for some of those opportunities there. I know Secretary Scott Turner is really big into folks working, getting back into the community and having that workforce housing available. So we'll be kind of curious to see if any programs come out of that too as well.
So I definitely don't want to monopolize all of the question time, but I do have
No, go ahead.
another question. So you mentioned sitting on the grant review committee and seeing some really cool initiatives around the country. Is there something that sticks out in your mind that could potentially work for a Maine community?
I think, trying to think of specific here to Maine. I will say some of the ideas that I was truly impressed with, and I know we are starting to see it here in Maine. I think Portland has kind of teetered around some of these ideas here. But having housing that really supports, you know, the individual or the family itself. So some of the ideas that I saw in the pro housing was actually building like a new apartment building that has childcare inside that facility available to the folks that reside there. Just for example, a lot of folks that you know, live there, have kids, what have you, it could be really hard to find a daycare or find somebody to provide that childcare support so you can go out and work, do, you know, do whatever you need to do. So some of the cool opportunities or some of the grant applications that I saw really tied in that piece of childcare, transportation for folks. Some of the more rural towns, for example, don't necessarily have a bus system, you know, to bring people to work. And so some of these housing development projects are actually having or catering to have drivers available to transport people to work, pick them up from work, bring them home, bring those folks to, you know, doctor's appointments or what have you as a 24/7 service. So I thought that was really interesting too as well, because transportation's another, you know, big dampener for some folks. You know, you can find a job, but do you have reliable transportation to get there, to get back, you know, to run errands? I know I was doing an event up in Fort Fairfield a couple of weeks ago, and of course they got forget what it's called, the Aroostook Rural Transport. I'm forgetting the total name of it there, but it's a great program that they have because they actually have shuttles that will go to somebody's house, pick them up from work, you know, bring them back home after work, what have you. And I think that's just a really cool piece, but it's not necessarily tied into just housing. You know, it's available to many folks, you know, whether you live in a home that's not subsidized or what have you. You know, I thought that was a great program. A lot of towns are actually looking at trying to get creative to make their towns more marketable. So some of these folks didn't necessarily have a game plan in place for what they wanted to build for housing, but they're like, hey, we want money to have the experts come in here and look at our town, look at our county, and see what we can actually do to make it more marketable for folks to actually want to come up and build affordable housing, to make it worth their while to do those big housing developments. So some of the more rural towns applications that I looked at, that was probably their biggest request, was to get funding to bring in those folks to do the studies. I think especially in the rural areas, it's really hard to get continuity, you know, with folks that, you know, work for the city, work for the town. And so if you constantly having a turnover of that staff, it's really hard to keep the momentum or the gas going to do some of these projects. So I think if you had the money to hire somebody to come in and do those, basically lay you out a game plan like, hey, this is what you need to do. It makes it much easier, you know, for those towns to kind of go, all right, well, that's great. I'm going to go apply for some grants and I already got the information. I can plug and play and then hopefully build some more affordable housing.
So I'm just full of questions today. If anybody else
Yeah.
has a question, feel free to cut me off. You mentioned earlier that this isn't verbatim, but it was something along the lines of if you have the advantage of having a PHA. Can you expand on that? Is there a benefit to a community to create a PHA? What does that look like as far as affecting that positive change?
Yeah, I think for a lot of folks, having an actual housing authority it just, for one, it opens the door for more funding from HUD. So if you have a housing authority, you can get an operating budget, which could pay for staff to operate the housing authority itself. So having just the extra staff available to your town that is focused in on housing, I think frees up some of the time for other folks that maybe are trying to do housing, but they're not housing experts per se. So it just kind of increases that bandwidth. Having a housing authority opens you up to more funding opportunities too as well. So that's another great positive. And on top of that too, the multifamily housing program, which I had kind of alluded to, it allows more flexibility in that. So there's a lot of housing authorities that operate and manage multifamily housing. So a lot of times in the state, you'll see these property management companies that own a bunch of properties scattered across the state. They do get subsidized, but having a housing authority, it kind of puts them under the town's control or the housing authority's control. So it gives you the ability to have a little bit more oversight and say in how those properties are actually being managed. You do hear the horror stories of some property management companies, what have you, that really don't take good care of their properties, or you're constantly having issues with them. And so if it's under the actual housing authority control, there is more of that oversight component piece, because now that they're using HUD funding, there's a lot more stricter monitoring and compliance. So I think there's just a little bit of that higher standard when it comes to it too as well. So I think the biggest advantage, honestly, of having an actual housing authority is having that extra bandwidth, having that extra staff. You can have a lot more support services for folks that reside in housing. I kind of touched upon it under the public and Indian housing, but there's some programs like the Ross program that provides almost like a case management services, to folks that reside in the low income housing. So again, it's having those extra supports. I think having the extra staff, the bandwidth, and opening the door to more funding opportunities, I think those are all the kind of the pros. And I think for some towns, we've had a few folks from towns that I've reached out to, like, so how do I actually start a housing authority? There is a little bit of you have to apply formally through the state of Maine. I don't know the specifics, but I believe you have to have a certain vote, through your city council to approve the formation or creation of an actual public housing authority. From there, you have to get the state to basically grant you that status too as well. HUD actually does provide a technical assistance program for a town that is looking at starting a housing authority. So I think that's obviously a great first place to start if you were curious on what it takes and kind of what the time frame is to get one started up. We do have that technical assistance too as well.
Before we go to Alan, I see his hand is up. We did have a question waiting in the chat. And this is from Jamie Beck, and it keeps moving. Is there funding which would be a great fit for innovative housing construction options like additive manufacturing?
Yep. So did I meet with you, Jamie, at the homeless veteran stand down? I think I met with her because I think she was talking about doing
Yes,
a
you
tiny
did.
home. Okay.
And I came to your office too. Hi.
Yes. How's it going? So
Good. How are you?
not too bad. Yeah, so I some of the biggest funding opportunities is definitely the CDS, Congressional Discretionary Spending, the CDBG, the Moving to Work, because that is really a pilot program grant opportunity. So if you have some of those innovative ideas or thoughts and you kind of want to put into reality, the Moving to Work program is a great one that you can kind of use as a conduit to do the housing. A lot of the other grants that I would say, there's not too much when it comes to that creative and innovation right now. A lot of our grants that we do have, like the Price Grant, Pro Housing Grant, a lot of that is for new construction. I forgot to mention Pro Housing Grant is another one too as well, because that can be used for that new construction, especially if it's innovative. But the Price Grant is for really renovation of manufactured homes. It's not necessarily for development per se. So right now, those are probably the Pro Housing Grant, CDBG, Congressional Discretionary Funding, and the Moving to Work are really the biggest 4 big program areas that you could use that money for that kind of work. So.
Cool. Alan, and then after Alan, we'll go back to the chat.
Sure, thanks. Look, without even conferring, I'm co-coordinator of Blue Hill Peninsula tomorrow, and I see Roberta has raised in the chat without any coordination here, raised the same question. So I think we can ask it in stereo. Roberta, do you want to ask it verbally? You're the chair of the select board in Castine.
That's hilarious that we have the same question. So I was wondering if it's possible to create a regional housing authority. For instance, all of the towns on the Blue Hill Peninsula, could we come together and create a housing authority?
So that is one I haven't been asked before, so I honestly don't know 100% for the state of Maine, but I
Well,
do
Gary, we're always
know.
happy. We're always happy to be the first to ask the question.
Well, that's actually a really good question because I mean, for some small towns, it may not be worth their while or really have the capacity to have a housing authority. But if towns were able to collaborate together, obviously it makes it much more worthwhile. I'm actually gonna pose that question to our Director of Public Indian Housing because I'm kind of curious about that now too as well. Let me get you some answers. And I can send an email out. I don't know if I can send it through Kristen or Jen. I don't know if I have your email directly, or if you want to put it in the chat, just your email address. I'll take it down and then I'll do some follow up on that. That's a really good question. I do know other states have done it. I just haven't seen it done in the state of Maine, so I just don't want to give you a wrong answer.
And Gary, this is Deborah Johnson. While you're asking that question, one thing about housing authorities, like for example, the Auburn Housing Authority is doing a project in Poland. Because you're the Auburn Housing Authority, it's your geographic area that you cover. That my guess is, Gary, you'll find out that when you do your application, you'll say what geographic area you cover. So like if Castine created a housing authority that covered the Blue Hill Peninsula, like the town of Brunswick, the Brunswick Housing Authority did a project in Topsom. That where they are doesn't mean they don't do other projects, or cover the area, especially if they have if they have vouchers. If you have a certain amount of vouchers, those vouchers can go anywhere in their geographic area. So that would be good clarity, because I never know the real clear answer on that. Is there a specific geographic area?
No, 100%. Like, for example, Maine State Housing Authority, they're everywhere across the state of Maine. So they kind of fill in the gaps where other housing authorities don't necessarily have kind of oversight. But it would be interesting from a dynamic of kind of, for example, like Auburn Housing Authority, they kind of more report to Auburn, but it would be interesting as far as kind of like that oversight component if you have those multiple towns there to kind of see how that pans out. But I will definitely, that is a very good question. So I will get an answer on that.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
Alan has brought a really exciting regional approach to our area. And so we want to keep going as much as we can.
That's a team
100%.
effort all the way around.
Exactly.
We have a comment in the chat. Gary, I don't know if you're able to follow the chat. Greg Paduke says, look into the Mount Desert Island Ellsworth Housing Authority as an example.
Yep. No, 100%. Yeah, they're one of the ones where they kind of, each of the little towns report to them. That's actually a good point. I can reach out to him.
I'll just say that Greg is really our expert on housing in the county. We're delighted that he's working for the Hancock County Planning Commission. He has a long background of long history of housing.
Yep. No, that's awesome.
Do we have any more questions for Gary?
Kristen, I don't know if you noticed it, but a comment or a question popped up in the chat from Stuart Kestenbaum. Said, hello, Alan. I'm co-chairing a housing task force for Deer Isle and Stonington. Are our communities part of the Blue Hill Peninsula tomorrow?
I'm sorry, the question was, I'm looking at the question here. Yes, those towns, yes. The towns on the Blue Hill Peninsula are in alphabetical order: Blue Hill, Brooklyn, Brooksville, the three, Castine, Penobscot, Deer Isle, and then the three S's, there's Sedgwick, Stonington, and Surrey.
Sounds like school cancellations.
Very topical.
Thank you.
I think I have one more question myself. You mentioned entitlement communities get consistently funded year after year. What makes a community an entitlement community? Do those change? Can communities be added to that? Can you just kind of summarize that?
Yeah, let me pull it up real quick here. That is one I don't necessarily talk about too often. Because honestly, that is one that I'm not 100% for, 100% sure on what necessarily constitute an entitlement community here. What I could do, I do know that they do change. I just don't know necessarily what the actual criteria is. I can follow up on that one too as well. I just don't want to give a wrong answer on what actually makes a community an entitlement community. So let me do a little bit digging on that.
Entitlement for CDBG and home, the CPD programs?
Correct.
Yeah, that's a population and formula based, just like the state program. So Bangor, Lewiston, Auburn, Biddeford, Cumberland County, they're all entitlements, and those are all formula based and population based. And actually, there's a movement, and you probably know better than I do, Gary, amongst HUD. They're trying to limit the amount of entitlements because there's too many. There's like 1,500 across the country, and it's a lot of work to manage all those entitlements. And so there's a movement to increase that threshold size. Like the city of Biddeford would not, if they increase the threshold size, they would not get their own small grant, which is only about 300. As you saw probably in the list that Gary provided, it's a very small amount of money, but it's the same amount of work to get your grant agreement. It's just less zeros. It's the same amount of work. So yeah, increasing entitlements is probably unlikely. But eliminating some and then moving them back into the state program is more likely, probably.
And I want to put out there too, I know one of the big things that the new HUD Secretary, Scott Turner, is really big on. He was part of the development was opportunity zones too as well for distressed communities across the country. I think last time I checked, there was almost like 9,000 opportunity zones. And I think that's going to be a key aspect when it comes to some of the funding too as well, is if you fall into one of those opportunity zones, it's going to unlock more opportunities for funding too as well. So be kind of curious to see how that pans out, like you were just saying with the entitlement communities, and then kind of really bringing back heavily the opportunity zones too as well.
Excellent, Gary. Do we have any last questions for Gary before we let him get back to his important duties for the day?
After this, I got to drive to Job Corps. We're doing an event with Bangor Housing Authority. So.
Oh, fun.
Yeah.
So Kristen, who is up on the roster for speaking at the next speaker series session? So 2 weeks from today.
Yes, yeah, you would think I would have it memorized since I did that. Hang on.
Sorry.
No,
I should have posed that question to Gary.
I know who it is, I promise. Maybe. We have 3 more speakers up.
Amanda Burke.
Yep.
March 5th.
Yep. And that'll be followed by Charlotte, Nut and Hope I as well. And potentially we might add a few more, or at least revisit one of our previous presenters. We're in the works for that as well. So we do encourage you to stay, to continue this journey with us. I would also like to mention, or, I guess kind of tease everybody that MCDA and HUD are working on something really cool for the end of May. I think I put it in the MCDA newsletter, so it's not such a secret. Is it okay, Jen, can I?
Well, it still is in the planning stages, so I would not put it on, I wouldn't save the date yet on your calendar, but I think it's going to probably happen.
Okay, so we'll just end it there. You guys just know we're working on something big, and it's probably related to housing. So we'll let that stand. If everybody is good, no more questions, we will post this on the MCDA website in the next day or so. We're getting them up pretty quickly. Gary, I'll have you send me your slide deck, and we'll have that attached as presenter materials as well. So,
and if
Don't
anyone
forget
missed it, I did put the link in the chat for the CDBG-TA providers. It's right up on the MCDA, main OCD, sorry. It's all of these acronyms, Office of Community Development website. So I just put the link to the website in there for you.
Awesome. Thank you. And I just want to put out there too that the event that Kristen was alluded to may have miniature ponies. There too, so.
Only if Kristen has her way.
Don't play with me, Gary. All right, everybody. You have a wonderful couple of weeks, and we will see you back here Wednesday after next.
Thank you,
Thanks,
everyone.
everyone.
Thank
Bye-bye.
you.